6 months of silence followed the massacre. The galaxy moved on. The Korath Empire mined their stolen minerals and celebrated their easy victory. Other species whispered about the soft humans who had fled from their first real test. Ambassador Tellin gave speeches about the natural order of things, how some species were meant to lead and others were meant to follow, inside Earth's sealed borders. A different story was being written. Admiral Park. Tesu stood before the United Earth Parliament in a hall filled with anger and grief. Every seat was taken. Every face was hard. He had spent 6 months planning this moment, and now it had come. His voice was steady as he spoke. The words went out to every human settlement, every ship, every station in their space. Billions of people stopped what they were doing to listen. He spoke of New Sol. He spoke of the 12 million dead. He spoke of the yellow clouds and the children who died in their classrooms. He spoke of the rules humanity had followed and the rules the Korath had broken. Then his voice changed. It became something cold and sharp. They used our honor against us, he said. They murdered our children while we followed rules they never intended to keep. The galaxy calls this civilized warfare. We have a different name for what happened. We call it a massacre. And Earth has only one answer to a massacre. The Parliament rose to their feet. The vote was taken. It was unanimous. War. Total war. War without rules, without mercy, without end. Dr. Choi Yuna was a scientist who had spent her career studying alien technology. She was brilliant but quiet, more comfortable with machines than with people. When Admiral Tesu came to her laboratory personally, she knew something important was happening. He gave her unlimited resources, unlimited personnel, unlimited authority. Her mission was simple: create weapons that the galaxy had never seen, weapons that would make the Korath wish they had never heard of humanity. She called it Project Retribution. Within weeks, she had gathered the brightest minds on Earth. They worked in secret, hidden deep underground, creating nightmares that would shake the foundations of galactic warfare. Lieutenant Yoon Daeho was a tactical officer with a gift for seeing patterns others missed. He had watched recordings of the New Sol attack 1,000 times, studying every Korath move, every decision, every weakness. Admiral Tesu gave him a new task: build a new kind of soldier. The old training focused on following rules, engaging honorably, respecting the conventions of civilized warfare. Daeho threw all of it away. He created warriors who struck from shadows, who disappeared before the enemy knew they were there, who fought with tricks and traps and ruthless efficiency. The recruits came from every nation on Earth. They had all lost someone at New Sol. They trained with a fury that frightened even their instructors. They learned to fight dirty, to think dirty, to win at any cost. Sergeant Bei Wujin led the ground forces. He was a large man, with a scarred face and gentle eyes that had turned hard after New Sol. His sister had been a nurse in the colony's main hospital. She had died trying to save her patients, even as the yellow gas filled the halls. Wujin forged the Black Wolf units. Soldiers who could survive on any world, in any conditions, against any enemy. They trained in deserts and ice fields, in jungles and mountains. They learned 100 ways to kill and 1,000 ways to disappear. Commander Shinari worked in the shadows. She had been an intelligence officer before the massacre, tracking threats that never materialized. Now she had a real enemy to study. She built a network of spies and informants throughout Korath space. Merchants and traders, refugees and criminals, all feeding information back to Earth. She learned the location of every Korath base, every supply route, every weakness. She mapped their military like a doctor mapping a patient's veins. Looking for the perfect place to cut, Captain Kim Hanna spent the 6 months in darkness. She had returned from New Sol a ghost, barely speaking, barely eating. The images of her brother's family haunted her every moment. Admiral Tesu visited her in her quarters one night. He did not offer comfort or sympathy. Instead, he offered her a fleet. The Black Wolf Strike Fleet, the deadliest force humanity had ever created. He asked if she wanted revenge. She looked up at him with eyes that had forgotten how to cry. She said one word, yes. The preparations took 6 months. When everything was ready, Admiral Tesu gave the order to open communications with the galaxy once more, but it was not a message of peace. It was not a request for help. It was not a complaint to the SL Galactic Council. It was a declaration. The broadcast went out to every species in known space, to the Korath Empire, to the Council, to the hundreds of civilizations who had watched New Sol burn and done nothing. Admiral Tezu's face appeared on billions of screens. His voice was calm, almost gentle, which made his words even more terrifying. To the Korath Empire, you taught us what civilized warfare means to you. Now we will teach you what war means to us. There will be no declaration. There will be no rules. There will be no surrender accepted. This is not a war. This is a reckoning. The message ended. The screens went dark. Ambassador Tellin called an emergency session of the Galactic Council. He demanded that they intervene. They remind humanity of the rules they had agreed to follow. But the humans had already shown what they thought of the rules. Their ships were not gathering at the border. Their fleet was not forming in any pattern the galaxy recognized. General Morak laughed when he heard the declaration. Humans were soft, he reminded his officers. They had run away after one battle. What could they possibly do against the Korath Empire? He would have his answer soon enough, in the darkness between stars. Captain Kim Haena guided her fleet through routes that no one knew existed. Dr. Choi Yuna had found wormholes that bypassed every border, every defense, every warning system. The Black Wolf fleet moved like ghosts through the void. They were coming, and the Korath had no idea what was about to hit them. Commander Shin Nari had provided the targets. Lieutenant Yoon Daeho had designed the attacks. Sergeant Bae Woojin had trained the soldiers. Admiral Park Tae-zu had given the order. Now, it was time for Captain Kim Haena to deliver humanity's answer. The silence was over. The storm was about to begin. The stars had always called to humanity. For thousands of years, people looked up at the night sky and wondered what waited for them in the dark between worlds. In the year 2297, they finally got their answer. Humanity was not alone. The Galactic Council sent their ships to Earth with open arms and promises of peace. They spoke of trade, knowledge, and friendship among the stars. They also spoke of rules. The rules of civilized warfare, they called it. A system that had kept peace among hundreds of species for 10,000 years. Admiral Park Tae-su remembered sitting in that first meeting with the alien diplomats. He was a young officer then, fresh from the academy, chosen because of his calm nature and sharp mind. The aliens explained their rules with pride. No targeting of civilians. No weapons of mass destruction against populated areas. Formal declarations before any conflict. Limited engagements with clear objectives. It sounded perfect. Too perfect, Tae-su thought even then. But humanity was new to the stars, and they wanted so badly to believe. 50 years passed. Humanity built colonies on distant worlds. They traded with alien species and learned their languages. They followed every rule, signed every treaty, and believed that civilization among the stars was possible. New Sol was their proudest achievement, a colony of 12 million people on a world rich with minerals and beauty. Families built homes there. Children were born there. Schools and hospitals and parks filled the growing cities. Captain Kim Haena had grown up on Earth, but her younger brother had moved to New Sol with his wife and 2 daughters. She visited them whenever her patrol routes allowed, watching her nieces grow taller with each passing year. Then came the dispute. The Korath Empire was old. They had conquered dozens of worlds before the rules of civilized warfare forced them to change their methods. Now they used the rules as weapons, claiming territories through legal challenges and limited engagements that smaller species could not win. There were bullies wearing the mask of civilization. They claimed the mineral rights to New Sol's northern continent. The claim was weak, based on an ancient survey that predated human arrival. But the Korath were powerful, and the Galactic Council suggested humanity negotiate. Admiral Tesu, now commander of Earth's fleet, advised caution. Something felt wrong. The Korath had never shown interest in human space before. Why now? Why this colony? But the Council assured them the Korath would follow the rules. They always did. A formal engagement would be declared. A small battle would determine the mineral rights, and life would continue. Captain Hannah was given command of the defense fleet. 20 ships against the Korath's 50. The rules favored the larger force but also protected the defenders. She prepared for a difficult fight, but a fair one. The Korath fleet arrived on a Tuesday morning local time. General Morok sent his formal declaration of limited engagement. His terms were clear. A battle in orbit, military ships only. Winner takes the mining rights. Hannah accepted as protocol required. Her crew prepared for battle. Her brother sent her a message from the surface, wishing her luck. His daughters had drawn pictures for their aunt, filled with stars and hearts. The battle began at noon. For the first 10 minutes, everything followed the rules. Ships exchanged fire at regulation distances. Hannah lost 3 vessels. The Korath lost 5. It was brutal but controlled. Then the Korath transport ships broke formation. They were supposed to hang back, carrying supplies and wounded. Instead, they dove toward the planet. Hannah screamed orders into her communicator. This was against the rules. Transports were not combat vessels. They could not engage in the battle, but the transports were not heading for her fleet. They were heading for the cities below. She watched in horror as the first chemical bombs fell on New Seoul's capital. Yellow clouds spread through the streets, seeping into buildings, into homes, to schools where children sat at their desks. The poison worked fast. People collapsed where they stood, their lungs burning, their eyes bleeding. Hannah broke formation, trying to stop the transports. But the Korath warships blocked her path, still following the rules of engagement. Keeping her trapped in orbit while death rained down on her people, 12 million souls lived on New Seoul. The attack lasted 6 hours. When the yellow clouds finally settled, scanners showed no life signs in any major city. General Morak sent a final message before his fleet departed. His voice was calm, almost bored. The Korath Empire claimed victory in the engagement. The mineral rights were now theirs. He thanked humanity for a civilized battle. Hannah's ship drifted in orbit above a world of corpses. She tried to contact her brother. No answer. She tried again. Silence. She kept trying for hours. Even though she knew no one would ever answer again, when she finally landed, the silence was the worst part. No birds singing, no children laughing, no sounds of life at all. She found her brother's home in the Eastern District. The yellow residue still stained the walls. Inside, she found 4 bodies: her brother, his wife, and 2 small girls who had died holding hands. The galaxy reacted with shock and sympathy. The Galactic Council held an emergency session. Ambassador Tellin, a tall being with silver skin and empty eyes, expressed deep concern over the unfortunate incident. He proposed a formal investigation. 3 months later, the investigation concluded. The Korath Empire had indeed violated the rules of civilized warfare. Their punishment was a fine equal to 10% of the mineral wealth they had gained, and a formal letter of condemnation. Admiral Tesu read the judgment in silence. Around him, the leaders of humanity waited for his response. He set down the document and looked at each of them in turn. Then he gave an order that changed everything. All human ships would return too. All diplomatic missions would be recalled. All communication with the Galactic Council would cease. Humanity was going dark. The galaxy watched with confusion as human vessels disappeared from every port and station. Ambassador Tellin reported that humanity had retreated in grief. A soft species, he called them. Unsuited for the harsh realities of galactic politics, he could not have been more wrong. The first attack came on a night that had no dawn, deep in Korath space. 3 military shipyards orbited a dying star. These facilities built the warships that had terrorized dozens of species for centuries. They were protected by defense platforms, patrol fleets, and the simple fact that no enemy had ever struck so deep into Korath territory. The workers on the night shift were half asleep when the alarms began. Most thought it was a drill. Then the first explosions lit up the darkness. They understood that something impossible was happening. Captain Kim Hanna led the Black Wolf fleet out of nowhere. The wormholes had delivered them perfectly, right behind the defensive lines that were supposed to protect these shipyards. Her ships struck with precision that the Korath had never faced. No warning, no declaration, no mercy. The first shipyard died in fire within 3 minutes. The second lasted for... The third tried to launch its half-built warships, but Hanna's gunners cut them down before they could power their engines. By the time Korath Command received the distress signals, it was over. The Black Wolf fleet had vanished back into the wormholes. Leaving nothing but wreckage and burning metal, General Morak received the news while eating his morning meal. He threw his plate against the wall and screamed at his officers. This was impossible. The humans were supposed to be at their border, waiting for a proper engagement. How had they gotten inside Korath space? He ordered his main fleet to abandon the border and hunt for the human ships. They searched for weeks. They found nothing. Lieutenant Yoon Daeho had planned the next phase of the campaign. He had studied Korath logistics for months, mapping every supply route, every fuel depot, every ammunition storage facility. The Korath military was large, but like any large machine, it needed constant fuel to keep running. Daeho's plan was simple. Cut the fuel lines and watch the machine die. Human strike ships appeared and disappeared like ghosts. A convoy of supply vessels would be traveling through safe space, and suddenly there would be explosions, chaos, death. By the time reinforcements arrived, the attackers were gone. No messages were left. No demands were made. Just destruction. General Morak demanded a formal engagement. He sent message after message to Admiral Park Tae-soo, invoking the rules of civilized warfare. He challenged humanity to face the Korath in honorable battle. Admiral Tae-soo sent back a single response. It was an image of the mass graves at New Seoul, where 12 million bodies had been buried in trenches that stretched for miles. Below the image were 3 words: "Remember this always." The Korath leadership began to understand that something had changed. This was not the soft species they had massacred at New Seoul. This was something else entirely. Something they had awakened with their cruelty. Sergeant Bae Woo-jin led the ground campaign. His Black Wolf soldiers landed on Korath military worlds in the dead of night. They did not come to capture territory or win battles. They came to break things. Command centers exploded with their generals still inside. Communication towers collapsed in flames. Fuel storage facilities burned for days, and the attackers vanished like smoke, leaving no bodies, no prisoners, no evidence except the destruction they left behind. The Korath ground forces grew paranoid. Soldiers saw shadows in every corner. Officers slept with weapons beside their beds. Morale crumbled as the attacks continued. Unpredictable and unstoppable. One Korath colonel wrote in his personal log, "The humans are not fighting a war. They are haunting us. We cannot see them. We cannot catch them. We can only wait for the next explosion and pray we are not inside it." High Lord Velen, supreme ruler of the Korath Empire, finally took notice. He summoned General Morak to explain how a species they had so easily crushed was now tearing apart his military from the inside. Morak had no answers. His forces were trained for civilized warfare, for formal battles with clear rules and predictable enemies. The humans refused to play by those rules. They struck where they should not be able to strike. They vanished when they should be caught. They fought dirty and without honor. And they were winning. High Lord Velen ordered more ships, more soldiers, more resources thrown into the hunt. But every convoy he sent became a target. Every reinforcement fleet was ambushed before it arrived. The humans seemed to know every move the Korath made before they made it. Commander Shin Nari's spy network was the key. Her informants were everywhere. Servants in Korath palaces, workers in Korath factories, traders who visited Korath ports. Every order from High Lord Velen, every plan from General Morak, reached Earth within hours. The Korath were fighting blind against an enemy who could see everything, Captain. Kim Hanna led raid after raid, never staying in one place long enough to be trapped. Her crew had learned to fight like wolves, striking in packs, tearing at their prey, vanishing before the hunter could react. She thought of her nieces every time she gave the order to fire. Two little girls who had died holding hands in a room filled with yellow gas. She did not feel guilt for what she was doing. She felt nothing at all except a cold determination to make the Korath pay for every life they had taken. The Galactic Council watched in stunned silence. Species that had considered humans weak and soft now saw something different. They saw a species that could learn, adapt, and fight with a ferocity that shocked even the most warlike civilizations. Ambassador Tellin attempted to intervene. He sent messages to Admiral Tesu, reminding him of treaties and protocols, warning of consequences for breaking the rules of civilized warfare. Commander Shin Nari broadcast her response to the entire galaxy. She showed the Council's own records, every atrocity the Korath had committed over centuries, every massacre they had performed. Every time the Council had responded with nothing but fines and formal condemnations, her voice was sharp as a blade as she spoke. You call this civilization. We call it permission to slaughter the innocent. That permission has been revoked. The message ended. The galaxy said nothing. What could they say? Humanity had shown them the truth that they had been ignoring for 10,000 years. The rules only protected the strong. They had never protected the weak. Now, there was a new power in the galaxy. One that did not care about rules. One that remembered its dead and would not stop until the debt was paid. The reckoning had only just begun. 2 years had passed since the first strike on the Korath shipyards. 2 years of blood and fire, and the slow death of an empire. The Korath had once ruled over 40 star systems. Now, they controlled barely a dozen. Their colonies had risen in rebellion as word spread of human victories. Species they had conquered saw an opportunity and took it. The empire was bleeding from 1,000 wounds. Humanity kept cutting deeper. Dr. Choi Yuna worked in her laboratory without rest. She had already given the military weapons that changed the nature of the war. Now she was building something that would end it. Project Silence was its name. A virus unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It did not target bodies or ships. It targeted information itself. Korath military networks ran on a system they had used for centuries, trusting in its complexity to keep them safe. Yuna had spent 18 months learning every detail of that system. Now she had found its weak points. She delivered the weapon to Admiral Jizu on a quiet morning in Earth's Central Command. A small device that could be uploaded to any Korath network. Once released, it would spread like a plague through their entire military communication system. The Admiral looked at the device in his hands. He asked her what it would do. Why UN? Explained in her calm, quiet voice. Every Korath ship would lose contact with command. Every base would be isolated. Every fleet would be deaf and blind, unable to coordinate with any other force. They would still have weapons. They would still have soldiers. But they would have no way to fight together. Tesu nodded slowly. He asked when it would be ready. Yuna said it was ready now. Captain Kim Hanna received her orders 3 days later. The final offensive would begin in 1 week. Her mission was to destroy the Korath fleet, not through one great battle, but through the death of 1,000 ships. She gathered her officers in the briefing room of her flagship. Lieutenant Yoon Dae-ho explained the tactical plan. Commander Shin Nari provided the intelligence on enemy positions. Sergeant Bae Woojin confirmed that ground forces were ready to strike at military installations across Korath space. The meeting lasted 3 hours. When it ended, everyone knew their part. There would be no room for error. This was the moment they had been building toward for 2 years. The week passed slowly. Hannah spent her nights in her quarters, staring at a photograph of her brother's family. The 2 little girls smiled up at her from the image, frozen in a moment before the yellow clouds came. She had carried this photograph through every battle. It reminded her why she fought. On the day of the attack, Admiral Tezu gave a final address to every human force in the field. His words were simple. Today we finish what they started. Today we make them answer for new soul. Today we show the galaxy that human lives have value. Fight well. Fight hard. And come home. The virus was released at exactly midnight, Galactic Standard Time. Within minutes, chaos erupted across Korath space. Ships lost contact with their bases. Bases lost contact with command. Fleets that had been preparing for battle suddenly found themselves alone in the void, unable to reach anyone. Panic spread faster than the virus itself. General Morak was on his flagship when the communications died. He screamed orders at his officers, demanding they fix the systems, restore contact, do something. But there was nothing to be done. The virus had infected everything. Then the human ships appeared. Captain Hannah led the main fleet against the largest concentration of Korath warships. Without coordination from command, the enemy fought as individuals, each ship making its own decisions, often getting in each other's way. Hannah's forces struck with perfect unity. Cutting through the confused mass like a knife through flesh, across the Empire, the same scene repeated. Human strike groups emerged from wormholes and fell upon isolated Korath forces. Ships that had once been invincible because of their numbers now died alone, calling for help that would never come. General Morak gathered what ships he could and attempted to organize a defense. He was a skilled commander, and even without communications, he managed to form a battle line around his flagship. His officers looked to him for guidance, and he gave them what courage he had left. He sent a message to Captain Hannah on an open channel, the only communication that still worked. He challenged her to single combat, ship against ship, commander against commander. He invoked the ancient codes of honorable warfare, the traditions that the Korath had supposedly upheld for millennia. Hannah's response was a barrage of missiles that turned his flagship into a ball of fire. She transmitted her own message as his ship died. Her voice was cold and empty. Your codes died with my people. Surrender or burn. The remaining Korath ships broke formation and ran. Some tried to fight. All of them died. By the end of the day, the Korath military fleet had ceased to exist as an organized force. High Lord Velen watched the destruction from his palace on the Korath homeworld. Reports poured in from every corner of his empire. Defeats everywhere. Fleets destroyed. Bases captured. His military, which had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, was being torn apart by a species he had dismissed as weak and soft. He sent a desperate message to the Galactic Council. He begged them to intervene, to stop the humans, to invoke every treaty and law that might save his empire. Ambassador Tellen argued on his behalf, warning that humanity had become a threat to all civilized species. Admiral Sparktezu appeared before the council via hologram. His face was calm, but his eyes held something that made even the oldest council members look away. He spoke slowly, making sure every word was understood. You built a system where the strong could prey on the weak and call it civilized. You punished massacres with fines. You told us to follow rules while our children were gassed in their beds. We followed your rules once. Never again. He paused, letting the silence stretch. From this day forward, any species that attacks human civilians will face what the Korath have faced. Not war. Extinction. The council chamber was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Admiral Tezu ended the transmission. 3 days later, High Lord Velen surrendered unconditionally. He had no choice. His fleet was gone. His military was broken. His empire was in flames. Humanity had won. But the true reckoning was just beginning, Captain. Hannah received the news of the surrender while standing on the bridge of her ship. Her officers cheered around her. Some cried with relief. The war was over. She did not cheer. She did not cry. She simply looked out at the stars and thought of 2 little girls who would never see them again. The price had been paid, but the debt could never truly be settled. The surrender ceremony took place on a dead world at the edge of Korath space. It was chosen for a reason. This was where the Korath had tested their chemical weapons 200 years ago, killing every living thing on the planet's surface. The skeletons of forests still stood like gray monuments to their cruelty. High Lord Velen arrived in a small shuttle, stripped of all honors and escorts. He walked across the barren ground to where Admiral Park Tezu waited with Captain Kim Hanna at his side. Behind them stood representatives from every species the Korath had ever wronged. Velen signed the surrender documents without speaking. His hands trembled as he pressed his seal to the pages. When he finished, he looked up at Tezu with hatred in his eyes. He said that history would remember this as the day civilization fell. Tezu's response was quiet but firm. He said that history would remember this as the day civilization began. The terms of surrender were absolute. The Korath military was dissolved entirely. Their weapons were destroyed. Their shipyards were dismantled. They would never again have the power to harm anyone. But humanity was not finished. High Lord Velen and his entire command structure were arrested and transported to Earth. They would not face the Galactic Council. With its fines and formal condemnations, they would face human justice. The trials lasted 3 months. Evidence was presented, recordings from New Sol, testimonies from survivors, documents showing that the massacre was planned in detail. The galaxy watched as the Korath leadership tried to defend themselves by citing the rules of civilized warfare, the same rules they had broken without hesitation. Dr. Choi Yuna testified about the chemical weapons used. Lieutenant Yoon Dae-ho presented tactical analysis showing the attack was designed to maximize civilian deaths. Commander Shin Nari revealed intelligence, proving that High Lord Velen had personally ordered the operation. Sergeant Bae Woo-jin did not testify. Instead, he submitted a single piece of evidence: a photograph of his sister in her nursing uniform, smiling on her first day at New Sol's hospital. She had stayed with her patients until the end. Captain Kim Hanna gave the final testimony. She spoke of her brother and his wife and their 2 daughters. She spoke of finding their bodies in a room stained yellow with poison. She spoke of the silence that had filled that city of the dead. Her voice never broke. Her hands never shook. She delivered her words with the same cold precision she had shown in battle. When she finished, there was nothing left to say. High Lord Velen was found guilty of crimes against humanity. The sentence was death. The execution was carried out on New Sol. At the center of the memorial that now marked the mass graves, 12 million names were carved into the walls surrounding that place. Velen was made to stand among them as he died, surrounded by the names of his victims. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. For 10,000 years, the powerful had acted without consequence. Massacres were punished with fines. Genocide was addressed with stern letters. The weak suffered and the strong grew stronger. That age was over. Admiral Park Tae-soo retired 6 months after the war ended. He returned to New Sol, to a small house near the memorial. He spent his remaining years tending a garden and visiting the names on the walls, remembering friends and family who had died there. Sometimes young officers would visit him, seeking wisdom about war and leadership. He gave them what advice he could, but he always ended with the same warning. War is not glorious, he would say. It is not honorable. It is simply necessary, sometimes, to protect those who cannot protect themselves. We became monsters to defeat monsters. Never forget the cost of that choice. Captain Kim Hanna accepted command of Earth's defense fleet. She led with the same cold efficiency she had shown during the war. But she also built something new: a network of protection for weak species throughout the galaxy. Any civilization that faced extinction could call on humanity for help. She never married. She never had children of her own, but she made certain that other families would not suffer what hers had suffered. When she finally died at the age of 92, her ashes were scattered at New Sol. In the garden that grew where her brother's house had once stood, Dr. Choi Yuna returned to her research. But her focus changed. She had built weapons of war. Now she built tools of healing. Medical technologies that could repair damage from even the worst chemical attacks. Devices that could detect and neutralize biological weapons before they killed. She saved more lives in peacetime than she had taken during the war. Lieutenant Yoon Dae-ho continued training soldiers, but his methods evolved. He taught not just how to fight, but when to fight and why. His students became peacekeepers as much as warriors. Sent to protect the vulnerable across the galaxy, Sergeant Bae Woo-jin led the Black Wolf units for another decade before retiring to a quiet life on Earth. He opened a school for orphaned children, teaching them not just combat skills, but philosophy, art, and kindness. He never spoke of the war except to say that it should never happen again. Commander Jinari became Earth's permanent representative to the Galactic Council. Her first official address set the tone for a new era in galactic politics. She stood before the assembled species, her voice calm, but carrying to every corner of the Great Hall. We came to the stars hoping to find friends. We found instead a universe where the powerful preyed on the weak and called it order. We will not conquer. We will not enslave. But we will protect. Any species that slaughters the innocent, human or otherwise, will answer to us. Not to your councils. Not to your rules. To us, the Galactic Council rewrote its charter that year. For the first time in 10,000 years, attacks on civilians carried real consequences. The weak had a protector. The strong had a warning. Years passed, decades, centuries. Humanity spread across the stars, building new worlds and making new friends. They became known not as conquerors, but as guardians. When danger threatened the innocent, human ships were first to arrive and last to leave. They never forgot New Soul. Every human child learned the story. Every human ship carried a piece of that memorial, a small stone engraved with the names of 12 million dead. A reminder of why they fought and who they fought for. The galaxy had wanted civilized warfare, formal declarations and limited engagements and rules that protected the strong while the weak suffered. Humanity had offered something different. Justice. Real justice with teeth and claws and the will to use them. Protection for those who could not protect themselves. And a promise that would echo through the ages. Never again. The stars were vast and cold and full of dangers. But among those dangers now walked a species that had learned a terrible lesson and vowed to teach it to anyone who forgot. They had been soft once, trusting in rules and civilization and the basic goodness of the universe. Then they had seen their children die. Now they were something else entirely. Something that the galaxy had never seen before. Something that would never let the innocent suffer again. While stronger powers looked away, they were human, and the universe would never be the same.